Shadow Generations is the new campaign of the Sonic X Shadow Generations game. And it's incredible. This game's existence is the smartest move I've seen Sega make in years, taking the idea of Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury and doing it with Sonic. With Sonic, take a good 3D game that released on modern enough hardware, so of course they chose the only good one and mashed it with a brand new game, Shadow Generations. What makes this so smart is that they don't need to make Shadow Generations this massive game that takes tons of assets. They can instead make a focused, condensed adventure that reuses assets and mechanics while still sprinkling in some new ideas. This combination has led to what is now in my top 3 Sonic games of all time, and what I think is one of the most polished Sonic games out there. Spoiler warning going forward, but I just want to make this review since I had such an enjoyable time with this game from start to finish. This is shocking for my standards with Sonic games because most of them have some kind of fatal flaw that keeps it from greatness. Colors, for example, has too much slow 2D, Secret Rings controls can be difficult, Forces is too simple, and Frontiers is just all over the place. Shadow Gens, however, is very focused, intentional, and sure of itself. Because of this, the only flaw I can give the game is that it's too short. But even then, I would argue it's not. My first playthrough took about 9 hours because I was going out of my way to collect the medals in the levels, get S ranks, do all the side challenges, and just exploring the open zone. If I cut a lot of that out, I would say this is a 5 to 6 hour game and a 3-hour game if you're really gunning it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that length when the game itself is as fun and polished as it is. Starting with Space Colony Arc Act 1, I love how this level really lets you know that this game is built different. The level design starting out isn't super open, it's semi-linear with some alternate paths, but they then lead back to the main path. But I'd say once you enter the indoor section, the level really opens up. Completely different paths can be found here, all weaving in and out of each other, requiring use of Shadow's abilities that only he could do, such as Chaos Control in his homing attacks, or boost launching off this ramp, or using Chaos Control on this green little light dash orb to skip a huge chunk of the level. Then, Black Doom shows up and takes us to his evil, scary, demonic realm, Radical Highway. This section is pretty linear, as it's meant to be a bit of a chase sequence with Black Doom, and it's still quite fun and has some openness with its design. My favorite part is when we get sprung up into this crazy psychedelic illusion, and then Black Doom leads us towards this massive crumbling building that we then have to skate down, with huge ramps that you can get higher jumps off of with some skill. I love this since it's a very unique set piece that still has the player heavily interacting with it. We finish by homing attacking Black Doom and some robots, transport back to Space Colony Arc, level end. For most players, that first playthrough is going to be at least 5 to 6 minutes long. That is insane for Boost Sonic standards, as we haven't seen level length that long since Unleashed, over 15 years ago. Everything since has been 2 minutes or less, already off to an incredible start. Then we have Act 2, which is a 2D act which is going to be the norm for most of this game. And unusually so for Boost Sonic games, I actually really like the Act 2s in this game. Shadow's physics in 2D aren't the best, which is pretty typical for these 2D Boost style of levels, but they still have a lot of the openness that you will see in the 3D levels of this game. I like how this 2D level really rewards you for using the Chaos Control at the right time, such as using it on the right time on these missiles so that you can get onto the upper path, which is actually on the left, which you really have to go out of your way to go to. This level also introduces the Doom Wings, which is a really fun move that's essentially Shadow's super form. By holding the boost button in the air, you get to fly through basically anything, and it's really fun. It's a bit basic, but the level design accounts for that and still has you do some really cool stuff. Off to a good start with the Doom powers. Rail Canyon from Sonic Heroes is next, and I gotta say, this is a really fun pick. I'm not the biggest fan of Rail Canyon in that game, but I still enjoy it, and I think it's even better here. As you'd expect, this level focuses a lot on the rail grinding, which is a concern for many people because in the last several Boost Sonic games, rail grinding has become extremely simple, and not much is going on when you're doing it. It is still the same semi-uninteresting mechanics on the rails, but what they make you do surrounding them is what makes the rails interesting. For example, you have these big trains chasing you, you have to use Chaos Spear on these enemies, jumping off of them to find other paths. It is still all very interesting and in-depth, and you have to be thinking even when you're on these very simple rails. One of my favorite parts of this level is where there's this fan that pushes you up, but if you use Chaos Control, you obviously will be stopping the fan so you can go underneath it to a different path. I just think it's really cool because time stop abilities aren't super interesting in video games to me, but this game already is showing me there is a lot you can do with it in very interesting ways. Radical Highway returns in this level, and instead it's at daytime. This time around, some Doom monsters that look like starfish are in your way and they're spinning around, but you can use Chaos Spear to hit them, which stops them in place, meaning you have to time when exactly you want to throw out the spears to hit them so then you can pass underneath them without a problem. Returning to Rail Canyon, we have a cool chase sequence with the trains. It's nothing special, but it's a cool surprise for the first time. Overall, it was a really good level. Yes, the rails are still a bit uninteresting, but again, what you do around them is what makes it a really good level. Act 2 spices things up by having these circular rails that you have to spin around on so that you can get to a higher path, which reminds me of some of the Sonic Frontiers platforming in the open zone. As well as that, my favorite thing in this Act 2 is that there are moments where you need to use Chaos Control to stop things in the background from hitting you, such as the train. I just think, again, that is a really cool way to stop time in a video game. That is not done very often. Kingdom Valley in this game goes incredibly hard. Starting out, it introduces you to these wind rails that you have to activate by hitting these green orbs. The level design really tests you with this knowledge because later in the level, you can activate one of them, but then jump off of it onto a different upper pathway and go into this little cave section and find some other collectibles. It's really cool. As well as that, there's these jump ropes that are held between two pillars, and obviously if you homing attack it, you'll just bounce up a little bit. But if you stomp on it, which has never been a mechanic in most Sonic games, I feel like, you'll actually go into an upper pathway a lot of the time. Moving on to a water section, we use the Doom Surf to go on top of it, and it's really fun to glide on top of all this, drifting around, bouncing off of these boost ramps. And similar to the indoor section of Space Colony Arc Act 1, there's this massive open area of water with a ton of different pathways, and whichever one you choose always feels super interactive. I really like this section. One of my favorite things in this level is using the Doom Blast to hit an enemy into the air and finding a shortcut that way. For example, after the water section, you find this Black Arms alien, and after you blast it upwards, you can move all the way left around the tower and skip the entire fight sequence inside of it. Afterwards, we return to the water and have a mini-boss of sorts with one of the Black Arms aliens, and I just figured this out, but you can Chaos Spear all of the attacks it throws at you, and then if you Chaos Control, you get to homing attack it, Doom Blast, and skip to an upper higher path again. Afterwards, this wind rail will take you and launch you off into the air that is supposed to lead you to another section, but if you use what I like to call the Spear Dash in the air, you can press it a bunch of times and go flying over the level. This works because the Chaos Spear keeps your forward momentum, meaning that you can skip a lot of areas with it, which will come in handy later in the game. And as you can see, I'm really good at it. The level then ends in the same area that the Mach Speed section was in the original 06. However, you don't go nearly as fast as Sonic did in the Mach Speed, but instead, you have very open level design that once again rewards you for going onto the upper paths. That was also a very long level, just like Space Colony Arc Act 1, but I think it's even better because of how in-depth it requires the player to move. Before we move on to the next level, I want to talk about the open zone in this game. I think it is much better designed than Frontiers because a lot of the challenges throughout it are actually really fun, unlike the puzzles in Frontiers or the platforming, which all starts to blend in after a bit. Shadow's control in the open zone is really good. It's not as good as Frontiers because, for example, Sonic can turn like this in Frontiers, Shadow, not so much. But this open zone will still reward you for looking outside the box. Finding some secret passageways will reward you with some chests that have a lot of concept art or music. Again, I really like this open zone. It's not as big as the Frontiers ones, and he doesn't control as well in it, but I think that Shadow Generations open zone is simple and getting you from one place to the next, and when you think about it, that's all it really had to do. All the stuff on top of it is bonus fun stuff. Sunset Heights is up next, and it starts out a bit narrow, just like the original stage, leading you forwards. It'll take you in and out of these cool underground areas that have a bunch of enemies and water geysers in it. Navigating it is still pretty fun. Once you leave that water geyser section, there's this little bit with these massive spikes that are moving around in a circle, and if you're stupid, you'll run into it, but if you use Chaos Control at the right time, you completely avoid it, again, rewarding you for using the game mechanics. Then, my favorite part of the level, you're boosting straight towards this Death Egg Sentinel robot, and he's chucking a bunch of debris at you that you have to dodge. So of course you do all of that and go straight ahead, but once you do that, you'll realize that there was an upper path right above you. How do you get there? Well, again, if you Chaos Control at the right time, all of the debris will stop in midair, and you get to homing attack it and get to that upper path, skipping the section that you were going to go to that was a lot slower. That is just genius design because once again, they're using a slow motion mechanic in a way that actually makes a lot of sense and rewards you for thinking outside the box. You do a similar thing right afterwards with 3 robots chucking stuff at you, and you have to avoid them, obstacles, robots. There's just a lot of stuff happening there that I also really love. You go through this cutscene that loads you into the underground area, which we've never really seen in the original level, and that makes it really cool to see here. While we're down here, some of the Black Arm aliens attack you, and the only way to get them away from you is to use the Chaos Spears by holding the button and then letting it go. This can get a bit complicated since Shadow moves faster than the spears sometimes, and the enemies are also going right at you, which means you have to carefully time yourself on when you let it go. One of my favorite parts of this underground area is using the Doom Blast to go to this upper path, which you don't even see unless you go out of your way to move this stick once you Doom Blast them. And there's a collectible up here and a shortcut that you can take, which again, I love. Once again, we return to Radical Highway. And once again, it's really fun taking you through these psychedelic illusions that look really cool. However, something that really tripped me up in my first playthrough was these circular things. In them, you have to move left and right to avoid obstacles and go to the rings, which obviously that makes sense. However, I couldn't exactly wrap my head around how they controlled, but the main thing to remember is that Shadow will always be moving forward automatically, so the only thing you have to worry about is moving left and right. I just found myself getting my left and rights confused when I was on the ceiling, but it's not around for super long, and again, it's quite fun. We leave Radical Highway with a sick pose and return to Sunset Heights, finishing the level. Once again, amazing. While Act 1 was really fun, I actually might like Act 2 just as much. Act 2 has a completely cloudy sky with rain falling everywhere, and it's beautiful, even on Switch. This whole level has the Death Egg Sentinel robots in the background shooting lasers at you from the background. This sounds simple, but the challenges that they make you do to avoid getting hit is actually really cool. For example, maybe it's faster to run over the platforms that they're about to hit before it's too late, but if you don't want to be as risky, you can homing attack an enemy before or after it because you'll get a height boost, which means you can jump over where they're about to hit. They even make good use of Shadow's unique abilities from Forces, where he can homing attack a bunch of enemies in a row, which can again get you out of tougher situations with the Death Egg Sentinel robots. Then this level takes you to the underground of Sunset Heights, with water sewers leaking everywhere that you have to avoid. This section also has you using the Doom Surf in interesting ways, such as using the right or left bumper to hit through these obstacles so that you can get to a lower path, which actually is faster. My favorite section is actually at the end, where a Death Egg Sentinel robot is trying to crush you from the background, but if you use Chaos Control, you can actually use it as a platform and continue in the level, leading to the end. I really gotta hand it to the 2D acts. We go to a lot of places that we never really saw much of in the original games, and if we did, it expands on it a lot in Shadow Gens. Chaos Island is up next and introduces us to the Doom Morph. This is the most complicated part of Shadow Generations since honestly the game does not tutorialize it very well, leaving it up to the player to figure out how the hell to use this thing. So the most basic way I can put it is if you just tap the button to homing attack these purple orbs in the sky, then you're just gonna go right through it, shooting along with the level. But if you hold it all the way, you're gonna swing through just like Spider-Man. But if you hold it and let go when you're directly underneath it, then you're gonna shoot up and get to higher pathways. Once you understand those rules, this is an incredible level. There's a lot of shortcuts you can take by using the Doom Morph, and a lot of them are really well hidden. After taking this cinematic rail that shows us the volcano exploding, we go into the underground section, which, unsurprisingly, looks very accurate to how it was in Frontiers. When you're down here, there's this tricky part where you're on this rail, and if you Chaos Spear these two light poles, then this pulley will come down. But I found that Shadow was always moving way too fast, and I would miss these at the last second, causing me to have to reverse and go backwards. The timing here was pretty tough for me, but even still, it's very rewarding when you get up there because you skip a bunch of enemies. We then get spat out to this lava area with platforming to do on top of the lava while still being attacked by the enemies that need to be Chaos Speared away, meaning you have to be constantly jumping, homing attacking, Chaos Spearing, and boost jumping over everything. And if you want to, the Doom Morph is above you, meaning that you can try and skip some of it, but interacting with all of these different things is very difficult but really fun since you're multitasking all of the fast routes. We then do some platforming up the side of the volcano, Shadow does a sick flip in the air, and we end the level. Again, very in-depth, quite difficult in that lava section, but again, a very fun level. I don't have too much to say on the 2D level, it really just focuses on the Doom Morph and shooting through these little passageways, and this platform thing that moves up and down. Not a huge fan of it, but it was alright. Radical Highway is our final level, and starting out, it's very dark and ominous, with a dark nighttime sky and a lot more enemies. This level asks a lot of the player, and eventually in this level, the Doom Wings return, meaning that this level accounts for Shadow having wings and not having wings, which sounds like a lot for the designers to take care of, but it's actually really well done here. I remember in this level I was trying to find the first collectible key, and I had no idea where it was, so after an hour of looking, I decided to look online, and it was a Chemical Plant Act 2 moment where you can actually go all the way over here to the right, and that just blew my mind. I did not think to do that. Similar to the other radical highways that we've been taken to throughout the game, there's a section where you have to skate down the side of a building, which is actually way more in depth than the one in Space Colony Arc Act 1. There's lots of different passageways that you can go on by jumping off of the building, or by going left and right throughout the building. Similar to Kingdom Valley Act 1, we have a little bit of a mini-boss section where you have to avoid a Black Arm alien's lasers, and if you take this orange ring that goes onto a rail, you get to actually attack the alien and use it for a shortcut with a Doom Blast. Ending the level, we're going up and down the Golden Gate Bridge with a bunch of platforming, and it ends with a big loop. Honestly, this was a really fun level. I don't have too much to say on it compared to the others, just because it was just a very tightly well-designed level. Radical Highway Act 2 is actually the only 3D Act 2 in this game, and it might just be better than Act 1. This level is still designed around Shadow and Shadow having the Doom Wings, and it is still a lot more open because of that. It starts out with platformings moving right for Shadow really quickly, and you have to avoid them or else they're going to hit you. You can do this by either waiting on the side or skillfully weaving around them, homing attacking enemies on the side of it. Afterwards, there's a free fall section, which once again has platforms moving towards you that you have to move around, but if you go underneath the platform that the game wants you to land on, there's a rail down there that leads you to another passageway. Afterwards, there's this big monster thing that I don't know the name of, but I'm pretty sure it's from Shadow of 5. This monster shoots out a bunch of huge whirlwinds at you, meaning that you have to platform while avoiding these. Once you get to the monster, it does take a while to do the Doom Blast on it to try and defeat it, because you have to do it twice while waiting for its attacks, but you can actually skip it if you use the spear dash that we talked about earlier in Kingdom Valley. And once again, if you're good at this game like me, you will have no problem with this. The ending section of this level has a bunch of platforms that are spinning over bottomless pits, which feels very risky at points because in the beginning of this, there's going to be enemies that you can homing attack, so then it's easier, but eventually the enemies are taken away, leaving it all up to you, the player, to navigate through these spinning platforms and make sure you land on it before you spin over. Moving on to bosses, the Bio Lizard fight is incredible. I love the game of cat and mouse where you have to avoid its mouth and its tail at the same time, making you run back and forth to avoid both of them. From the middle point of the boss onwards, it actually gets really interesting, with the Bio Lizard slamming its big purple hands, I guess, onto the ground that sends shockwaves everywhere. But if you chaos control once he hits the ground, then you can homing attack him and deal massive damage way earlier than the game would have allowed you otherwise. The boss then ends with the Bio Lizard shooting out a bunch of spears at you that you have to chaos spear yourself as Shadow, and then the Bio Lizard shoots out a big energy ball at you, and a cutscene plays where Shadow kicks it back at the Bio Lizard, jumps off of one of the purple orbs, punching the Bio Lizard and destroying it. Again, it's very in-depth and uses a lot of the game mechanics to its advantage, and for a first boss, that was great. Metal Overlord is up next, and already this is a really cool setting. The sunken ruins of Final Fortress, that is so smart because again, like I said in the beginning of the video, it's a combination of reuse and new stuff because we have the new, which is Shadow's Doom Surf, and then we have the old, which is being represented by Final Fortress, but it's made up of chemical plant assets, but you don't really realize that. Throughout this fight, we're chasing Metal Overlord through the waters, using the left and right bumpers to knock debris back at him, and finding secret passageways to get on the rails that are exactly the same as the ones in Final Fortress, and getting close enough so we can homing attack him. Then, there's a bit of a 2D section of sorts, where Metal Overlord is shooting a bunch of projectiles at you, like this diamond thing that you have to play tennis with him on, which sounds insane, but it's really fun. And he also shoots some missiles at you, and you have to hit the correct ones back at him. And if you don't, you're gonna get hit, meaning you have to redo that segment. And it ends with him throwing a massive battleship at you, then you jump off of it and slam into him, and I'm just gonna let this cutscene speak for itself. It's so good. Next up, we have Mephiles. This boss utilizes the Doom Morph in a lot of cool ways. It primarily has Shadow trying to navigate the purple sludge in his base form, and he has to find the Doom Morph while keeping all of Mephiles' clones off his back. Once you do, you have to dash into him, and then it leads into a Doom Blast that absolutely destroys Mephiles, like my god. Then Mephiles becomes this massive demon thing. It looks really cool, and it's more of the same where you have to dash into him, but this time you have to avoid a laser that's coming out of him. What I didn't realize you could do was actually chaos controlling his laser, so then you can go around him and hit him as many times as you want without the threat of the laser hitting you. And once again, the ending cutscene is so good. I'll let it speak for itself once more. And at the end, we have the final boss, Devil Doom. This is everything I could ever ask for from a final boss of any video game. It literally combines every single mechanic you've learned in this game and puts it to the test. That sounds so basic, but It is so rare to see that in a lot of games. First up, we have the Doom Surf, where you have to knock back the projectiles that he's shooting out at you, but these are a lot bigger and have a lot of lasers shooting out of it, making it a lot harder to hit it back at him. I enjoy the extra challenge here because once again, we've already done this in Metal Overlord and a lot of the levels, meaning that the challenge is very warranted here. The next section of the boss uses the Doom Morph, and each time that you hit him, the platforming challenges that you do will get progressively harder and harder. On the last one, I ended up dying quite a few times because I kept on swinging and letting go at the wrong time and getting distracted by the lasers that Devil Doom was shooting out at me. Then we go on to the final phase of the boss against Neo Devil Doom. And the music playing is an orchestral rock version of All Hail Shadow while still keeping Johnny's vocals. It was not what I was expecting for a final boss song, but it's still so good. This phase sees us using the Doom Wings chasing after Neo Devil Doom. Similar to the Doom Surf, we have to use the left and right bumpers to hit debris back at him, so then we slow him down, and then once we get close enough to him, we can homing attack his eye. The final cutscene has a couple of QTEs, and it ends with Shadow going straight through Neo Devil Doom. That was an intense final boss that used all of the game mechanics in very unique ways that put the player to the test. I've seen that some people wish it was a bit more in-depth and longer, and I can kind of agree on that. However, I am still very satisfied with what we got. Well, before wrapping it up, let's talk about the soundtrack. Overall, I think this soundtrack is actually really good. There's not any songs I dislike. However, there are just some strange choices that they made. They're choices that I personally wouldn't have made, but they don't sound too bad. As we all know, the Chaos Island remix is not what any of us expected, but over time, it's really grown on me and I kind of like it. Same with the Bullet Station remix. It does have a lot of, in my opinion, unnecessary electronic noise, but over time, once again, I really like it. Some of my favorite songs are probably Sunset Heights, Space Colony Arc, and the final boss song. Those really stood out to me. And that's about all I have to say on this game. It was a really good time, far better than I would have ever expected for what was essentially a side campaign alongside Sonic Generations. But in the end, this ended up completely overshadowing Sonic Generations, because all I see people talking about is Shadow Generations, because yeah, it's really that good. This really doesn't feel normal to be a Sonic fan and having a game that's this good with so few flaws. When the only unanimous flaw is that it's a bit too short, I think you have a massive win on your hands. So Sega, you've taken all of the right lessons from Sonic Frontiers and really everything before. Now, make something new with it. This is another game in a long series of games since 2011 that's been reusing assets and ideas. It is time for a wholly new game. You can still reuse assets, that's totally fine, but give us new ideas, new mechanics, something that's wholly new. Shadow Gens shows us that they have everything in their power to do something incredible. Shadow Gens is that incredible thing. But now, I want a wholly original thing. We are so close. With that being said, thank you for making it to the end of this video. I originally thought this was going to be a pretty short video. It was literally 100% unscripted. This video is pretty long now. I'm not sorry about that. I'm sorry for myself because I have to edit all of this, and that's going to take a while because college exams are coming up and I am just really tired. But I've had a great time with this game, and I hope you all have too. So with that being said, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.